All right, I think we're going to get it started. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for attending today's session. We are so excited to talk to you about the Whole Ebook ILL pilot, what we've seen over the last 12 months, and of course, where we're going in the future. So I'm Whitney Murphy, and joining me today in this conversation, we have George Machovec from Colorado Alliance, Alan Jones from the New School, Sylvia Bonadio from Brill, and Lisa Nachtigall from Oxford University Press. So I'm going to start us off by talking a bit about the background of the Whole Ebook ILL pilot, just to reacquaint everyone with what we're doing. So we have partnered with 6 publishers to make eligible over 250,000 ebooks as part of this pilot. We're also working with 4 library cohorts that represent over 100 US libraries. And all of this is being administered within our eBook Central platform, as well as our eBook Central, library admin portal, easy for me to say. And so what is happening is within the library admin portal, the librarians are creating the URLs for loaning, and then of course the patron is using our eBook Central platform for viewing the content. So this is a quick review of the publishers on the left and the librarians on the right who are participating in this pilot. And I really want to extend my deep gratitude to all of them for being patient with us and just working with us through all of this. It's been a lot. There's been a lot of uplift on behalf primarily of the librarians. And we are thrilled, though, to be able to stand here today, 12 months in, and share with you what we have learned. So to go quickly through what's included and excluded through this pilot, we have focused only on intra-cohort lending or consortial lending. We realize that it's a Herculean task in some ways to figure out how to share across librarians. And so we decided to make it easier on ourselves by just focusing on intra-cohort lending for the pilot purpose only. We're also only including owned content. So this excludes unowned DDA and EBA titles in the profile, as well as subscription titles. However, we are including all license in the pilot. So if a library chooses to lend a one-user license to their ebook as part of the pilot, that is great. We want to make it as open as possible. And then lastly, by using the eBook Central ebook platform, we are helping the patrons engage with that content in a great way with all the feature functionality of the platform. They can look at content online, they can copy, print, they may choose to fully download that title for the 2-week loan period, or just, of course, use some chapter downloads. So we are really focused on a great patron experience by using the ebook platform. So I'm going to cover a few of our pilot insights. We have 3 slides kind of organized by a high-level concept. So first, let's talk about the usage data so far. As of today, of course, because I couldn't help myself, I looked and we had just over 880 loans. So over a 12-month period, we're closing in on 900 loans. And while that is an admittedly modest amount of loans, I want to call attention to the fact that the owned title pool is actually about 20,000 titles. So 250,000 titles are eligible as part of this pilot, but of course, you have to own the title, which shrinks that pool to about 20,000. And what that translates to is about a 4% transaction rate of loan-to-own titles. And then in the far right corner, you can see that the average days before first access is less than 2 days. And I think that really calls up, the value of ebooks as part of Whole Ebook ILL. There's less friction, there's more simplicity for the patron to access the title, rather than waiting through, the print title to be shipped and all the logistics that are involved there. And then lastly, in that lower right corner, around the usage metrics, I found it interesting that the usage behavior between the EILL users and our standard eBook Central users is roughly the same. Most everyone is using the content by either viewing it online or printing. Hardly anyone is using the chapter or full downloads. And so, it speaks to the targeted nature of research, right where they come in, they're looking for what they need, and then they exit out. As far as the libraries that are participating, I love this slide. It's probably my favorite. This middle piece talks about the borrowing library market. And so I don't think it's altogether surprising that 75% of all the usage is being driven from the master's and doctoral universities. I mean, it completely makes sense given the scope of the content that we've made available. But I'm really fascinated by this 18% between public libraries and associate colleges, and the fact that there is an ample demand coming from them for this highly scholarly content, which again, I know speaks to the value of ILL, that no matter where you're located, we want to provide access via ILL to where you are, no matter what market or what library type you're closest to. And then if you step over and look at the loan frequency, 62% of our libraries participating have requested content 10 or fewer times. 88% overall have asked for one book one time. And so again, we're looking at the niche content that libraries don't own. It's not supplanting purchasing at this time. We're just getting the odd request for a piece of content and research that isn't yet owned. And then lastly, in this vein of sharing some statistics, I really want to focus on that bottom part here around top titles requested. So you can see that the top 3 titles carry a flag, and that's actually to indicate that we classify them as DEI content in our system. And so in talking with Alan and George just recently, they noted the fact that, of course, because of some arrangements in libraries where you have subject librarians, this interdisciplinary content isn't always, part of the acquisition process so cleanly. So we feel that, as part of this ILL process and being able to give you all of this data that comes with the ebooks, we can help surface some of those interdisciplinary subjects and really call attention to who's borrowing the content, and then of course the demand that might exist in the library that may not always be recognized. So our next steps, we're actually really thrilled to announce that we are going to be extending this pilot for another 12 months, and now we're also looking into international expansion as well. So we're really, focused on engaging with libraries across the world to make sure that we understand what they need in terms of a solution, so that when we roll out a scalable product, it addresses the needs of libraries worldwide. And then through the next year, we're going to be focused on interoperability. As I mentioned earlier, there's been a lot of upkeep and a lot of uplift on behalf of the librarians to support this, and we want to make their lives easier by looking into integrations and just facilitating the transaction for ILL. And then lastly, of course, we need to finalize the requirements for that scalable product. And we hope to have something, in the not too distant future that we can share with the community so that we can all kind of figure out, what our collective next steps will be. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to George, who will pick it up. Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Whitney. I'm George Machovec with the Colorado Alliance of Research Libraries. We're a nonprofit 501c3 consortium based in Denver. We have 16 member libraries, 15 are academic, and Denver Public Library also joins us. One of our big initiatives is our Prospector resource sharing system, however, which has about 200 libraries in it. So we open up our resource sharing to the entire state. We also include one library in Wyoming. We have in our mix about 25 academic libraries, and all of the rest are public libraries or community colleges. In our system, on our overall resource sharing system, it runs on InReach, but it's very similar to Reshare, many of you are familiar with. And we have about 15 million unique titles. And pre-pandemic, we were doing about 500,000 titles or lens per year. Right now, we're on the road to do about 420,000 this year. So we're recovering from the pandemic, but not quite fully out of the woods yet. So how do we lend books through our system? Well, libraries load these records into their local catalogs, and then it bubbles into the InReach system, essentially in real time. But in this pilot, patrons can request ebooks exactly like print books. And so that really makes it easy for the patron. And then the MARC record itself and some of the notes that we put in the system indicate to the patron that if something is a digital book and not a print book. We also like to talk about the fact that we are doing a lot of other ebook lending through our InReach system. So we do have contracts with other big publishers like Elsevier, Springer Nature, and other publishers. Those are direct contracts, but we are really interested in doing a pilot like this where we could work through an aggregator, because we don't have enough bandwidth in our consortium to have individual contracts with every publisher out there. Most of the other lending that we do is we actually ship PDFs to patrons. So when somebody requests a book, they download a PDF, and then we use a transport mechanism to get to them. But we love the ProQuest model because what it does is that when somebody requests an ebook, the lending library logs into the back end of eBook Central, and then they can get a tokenized URL, which they then send to the patron, and then the patron can read that book in place. And we get great use statistics. That's something we don't get with the other kind of lending, because you send a PDF, you don't know what happens to it. You don't know if it was ever used or how it was used. So what are some of our startup challenges? Of course, getting libraries to agree to participate. We have in our DDA program about 8 libraries. So we've got 3 or 4 of them now that are lenders. And then, of course, they have to make sure their records are contributed to the union catalog. They have to be tagged in a way to make them lendable. And we, of course, had to create staff instructions for how you would log into the back end, because the interlibrary loan folks didn't always know how to log into the back end of eBook Central. And of course, we're trying to encourage libraries to keep these record loads current, because sometimes they lag a little bit. So when a patron actually goes into the system, they literally just see the record, and there's a request it button. You hit the request it button, and then it goes to a lending library. If more than one library has it available, then what happens is that the system does load balancing, so it doesn't all go to the same library. But we also find that libraries load things at different rates, so that, for example, in this example here, on that bottom arrow, you see only University of Wyoming has it. There's other lending libraries who have it, but they haven't loaded those MARC records yet. And so, that's one of the advantages of having multiple libraries as lenders, because each institution has different speeds at which they load metadata. So we actually looked at 9 months worth of use data going through September. And of the qualifying books in our ProQuest package, about 5,400 were lendable. They were owned. These represented titles from 2012 to the present. And we only lent 73. But you'll notice something interesting here. 12 were lent to other academics, and 61 were to the public libraries. And you'd go, why is that? That seems even counter to what Whitney just shared. Well, the reason is that most of the academics who already have access to these books, either through ProQuest or through a different channel or a different arrangement. So what that means is that they don't need to borrow the books. Now, so that's why the majority of our lending has actually been to public libraries. But isn't that the whole point? You want to have the libraries who cannot afford this material otherwise, they want to be able to borrow it on occasion when they need it. And so from our point of view, that's actually a success story, because we're leveraging the libraries who really need the content for high use already get it, and the libraries who don't need it for high use, they can get it through interlibrary loan. So we view that as a success. One of the other interesting things we found is that we didn't do anything special to advertise this project. We just dropped those 5,000 records into a database of 15 million. So people are just finding them through their normal course of operations. No advertising. We also realize that in some cases patrons don't want an ebook, and if they're not paying close attention to the screen, they may get this URL and they go, what is this? But we also realize that's just the case, and if you don't read the screen, that's okay. So we're expecting, however, a lot more use this fall, because we only are reflecting data for the spring semester when we had just started. And now the fall semester, we're expecting much higher level of use. So that's why we're thrilled the pilot is going to continue for another year, because we'll get something covering an entire calendar year and maybe 2 calendar years. So we'll really get to see how things are done. Why this is important to us, as I mentioned before, equity, so that the small libraries have access to everything that the larger libraries have, and the ebooks aren't only if you will, available to the richer libraries. The pandemic, of course, really got us going in this, and we felt, So one of the things we're trying to do, whether it's through ProQuest or other direct publisher contracts, is to really get ebook lending, whole book ebook lending in for all of our contracts where we can. As I mentioned earlier, we don't have the bandwidth to negotiate with hundreds of vendors or hundreds of publishers, so working through aggregators makes sense in a lot of cases. And we do like the fact that we're just shipping URLs. There's no lost books, there's no damage, we get detailed use statistics. So all of that really plays into a nice approach. So a couple of things that we have thought about is that it really is helpful to have more than one lending library if you can for a title. As I mentioned, that load balancing feature will kick in. Also, some libraries, as I mentioned earlier, are slow in loading their MARC records. So somebody else beats them, that's great. We realize that the approach that we're taking really will work well for any sort of physical union catalog, InReach, reshare, share it. And so if you don't have something like a physical union catalog, you have to use other techniques to inform your patrons. And of course, one of the main things we're working on is clearly communicating with staff, interlibrary loan, and collection development folks so we can leverage this project. So thank you for your time.
Hey everybody, my name's Alan Jones. I'm from the New School in New York City. Talking a little bit about what our process was. I'm just curious, since I'm both head of tech services and systems, how many people have Iliad at their institution? Okay, well there you go. You're gonna learn a lot here. How many people have Alma at their institution? Okay, I'm gonna make a recommendation for all of you people to get an enhancement vote in at the end of my talk, so just make sure you pay attention to that. Okay, so we're an Aleph, Iliad, Primo institution, and what that means basically is we have very old technology trying to do some really cool stuff. That has presented with it certain challenges that I'm going to talk about, but I want to maybe think a little bit more broadly about what the user experience should actually be. So here you have a screenshot of what our what EILL actually looks like in our Primo institutions. We basically tell people right up front, they've got a 2-week loan, and they basically, at this point, we didn't do renewals, but I was still hoping. Here, it goes to Iliad. You basically have your screenshot where it's telling them exactly if you do note-taking or there's any other functionality that's not supported, like bookmarks, or that requires some kind of personal login. The tokenized URL is to a generic screen. It's not to their actual eBook Central account. So obviously things like bookmarks or notes won't actually work. If you want it, go to request the book or request the purchase. So that's something that is, I think it happened a lot less than you think. People want access to the content. They don't necessarily care so much about annotation and other types of features that I think we previously used to think was a lot more important than it actually is. This is our process in terms of what the EILL actually is. The request goes into Iliad. From Iliad, it goes to, at this point, NYU's Iliad. The request goes to eBook Central. And this is where things break down. Now you have to understand something we're one of the first libraries to implement reshare or easy borrow for Palsy. We do probably anywhere between 1,000 to 1,100 physical ILLs a month. To go to 4 different systems to try to do this was painstaking, okay? And then of all things, we actually had to take the tokenized URL, turn it into an email. The email actually went to EILL at New School EDU, and then we had to email the patron what the tokenized URL here. If there's any place for automation to happen, please, Whitney, make it happen. They would log in to, NYU would log in, they would create their tokenized URL, and then they would send it. So what I'm trying to say here is that there was this was a proof of concept to try to get this to look seamless. But there's a tremendous amount of complexity on the system side behind it that has a lot of work. Now, that said, there are a couple of other things that I think are important. One, I have to work in the word 1866 somewhere in my presentation. I'm on the NISO 1866 group. We included EBook ILL as a use case within that protocol. So now I'm going to get to my enhancement request for ALMA, which is make sure that if you are doing that voting, which is happening in January, that you look for the enhancement for ISO 18626 version 2021. And this is really important because all of that, EBook ILL is actually supported under that specification and that version of the specification. So if you want to do this in ALMA, that's how you get it done. Make sure that it actually happens within the protocol rather than having to worry about a vendor actually doing it. So here are the service expectations. Basically 1 to 2 days. We're open 7 days a week. We have ILL staff who are there. In our particular situation, EILL is actually handled by our e-resources staff as opposed to the ILL staff. So then there was an email to another email to another email. We do make purchasing decisions as far as if books are actually requested a number of times. And as I said, there's no note-taking and no renewals. With respect to the challenges, as I said, Iliad wasn't built for this. We've actually been working with Iliad, with Atlas systems to actually get this functionality included within some of the cross-functionality. And then they told me, well, if you just adopt 18626, then you'd be able to, I'm like, dudes, you're killing me. So as crazy as it sounds, this protocol is absolutely critical for more seamless interlibrary lending. The technical difficulties of the monthly loads that George was talking about, as well as different types of competing priorities. At the same time that this pilot was going on, we were also bringing up reshare, and then we started an ALMA integration, or an ALMA implementation. So we were pretty busy. If I had to make any kind of recommendations, don't do this as a peer-to-peer, do this as a group, for all the reasons that George said. The worst thing I can think about is that I have e-resource librarians going to 30 different vendors or providers of EILL and figuring out which one to go to in order to do it. The other reason for the specification is if we all talk the same talk, then hopefully we would be able to manage this through the lending software instead of having to go to libcentral to do it. And I think that's where we're headed. And as you think about EILL, which is really important because it's licensed material, also think that as you look at projects like Palace or other things that you've seen here at Charleston, CDL is another component of this. We don't want this all to happen. You have one app for EILL, you have another app for CDL, you have a third app for Palace. We want this all to happen within the same space. Ultimately, this is going to wind up being, or thinking about something like digital circulation. So we are working with ProQuest and with Atlas Systems for an Iliad add-on that would address some of this functionality, but we're still writing the user stories for that. So with that, thank you, everyone.
Hi, my name is Sylvia Bonadio, and I am the sales director for the Americas for Brill. If you're not familiar with Brill, we're a humanities and social science publisher. We also publish in human rights, humanitarian law, and international law. We're based in Europe. So why do we participate in this program? Well, we work with a lot of aggregators who are valued partners for distribution of our content. one of the missions for Brill is to make sure our content is available and distributed globally to the extent that we can. But also, we need to make a profit. We are a commercial publisher. So why are we participating in this program? Well, our motto is looking forward while learning from the past. That applies to our content, but it also applies to business decisions. And there have been days when Brill maybe was waiting to see if the internet would still be around 10 years later, and they were, so we better get with it. But now we understand we have to run with a pack. We have to stay with our cohort. We have to be willing to work with our partners and our customers to make our content available in the best way possible. So, and oh, by the way, my boss told me we were going to do this. So here we are. Let's see. We've also had some important discussions with our customers about Whole Book ILL and contract negotiations. So this is coming. We're with everybody else on this. So what are the benefits for us? Well, sometimes people are worried about cannibalization. Every time we've adopted a new pricing model, we've implemented a new way to sell our content, we've increased our sales. We've increased our visibility, we've increased the dispersion of the content, and our authors are very favorably impressed and very happy to publish with us. And we need our authors. We love our authors, so we have to keep going. Think about the population of scholars right now. Where are they? They are everywhere, and the internet is everywhere, and we have to be available to everybody wherever they're doing their research, at whatever time of day they're doing their work, and wherever they may be. Obviously, there are a lot of non-traditional students in this world right now, working part-time with people who are parents, taking care of elderly. All of these people need to have access to our materials. So this program is one of the ways in which perhaps people will gain access to our material. And it also, allows us to search for, find, and have scholars find our content. The downsides for Brill, we're not losing sales of books. We are actually allowing potential scholars in the future, potential authors, and people who didn't know about Brill or about an author that we publish or a series that we publish, maybe they'll find this through a whole ILL book. So we need to participate. We can't worry about the copy police. We can't worry about maybe no DRM and having our PDF of the book about Aramaic feminist literature flying around. We just have to keep going forward and just know that our community is respectful of copyright. And also we need to address the concept that Alan is trying to remedy and George are trying to remedy, giving that access to customers quickly and easily with a few clicks. So if ProQuest has that background information and operational system, God bless, because it's not at Brill right now. So what are our conclusions right now? Well, when we looked at the data, so far it's a small sample. And for Brill, we have some good cohorts in the academic community, but SUNY and Cal State, those are schools that have really good educational programs, and that's what we saw our usage in. But we do publish in a lot of religious studies, law, and so we're interested in having more academic institutions of different kinds, more PhD level schools participating in this pilot, perhaps, or larger populations with more books available to see what happens. Because I think, this is based on the meetings that I've been in this week, I think this is where things are going. So we're happy to participate. Okay. Lisa is next.
sorry for those of you on this side of the room. I'm going to talk in this direction. Thanks very much. I could just say what they said and open it up to questions, but I worked a little bit on my presentation, so I'll just jump into some of my comments. I did want to also, like Sylvia, talk a little bit about why we chose to participate. And I just want to back up a second and say, remind everybody that in addition to those of us on the stage right now, there was a much broader group of publishers and librarians. And for publishers in the room, we knew nothing about what happened when our print books are loaned through ILL programs. We didn't know what was happening. We didn't see any data. Well, I didn't even know how it worked. The benefit of this collaboration to me as somebody in my organization who can bring outside knowledge into my organization was just an incredible awareness of where ILL sits within the library ecosystem. And that was really quite a revelation for me. So that role in connecting with librarians as we all look at how to expand the availability of book content through the digital sphere was really invaluable. In the same sense, I think the idea of usage being today's currency, and in that ebook space, we can see usage, and through this program, we were able to really understand what the impact of that increased availability was going to have, both on the borrowing libraries, the lending libraries, and then us as the publisher responsible for distributing our authors' contents as broadly as we can. Understanding that while a lot of libraries might buy a lot of OUP content, not all libraries buy all OUP content. So that was the why we participated in this. And thinking about what questions we were looking to answer, and again, why is ILL offered? And this realization that it is very, in most institutions, it is very separate from the acquisition departments. And you know, I remember having early conversations in the lobby of the Francis Marion a few years ago when we started to talk about EBook ILL, and it was like, and I'm sitting there thinking, you have short-term loan. Why aren't you using short-term loan? Only to realize that the decisions and the planning and the cataloging of records for short-term loan was very separate from the availability of records for the discovery pool of an ILL program. Again, as publishers, we had no idea how ILL was done for print. So by extension, the learning opportunity for how ILL is working for ebooks kind of really revealed a lot of these kind of structural embedded planning differences at the libraries. So we started to get some of the answers to some of those questions. But what was really starting to drive why we participated and what we're now starting to see in some of the data is, what about purchasing activities? Will we see purchasing behaviors change on the part of the lending library if, again, sort of the business model for ebook lending is based on the concurrency level of a library? Is the borrowing library going to change their purchasing based on the usage statistics that they're seeing? Is it going to sort of creep over into the acquisitions decisions if they're seeing a lot of ILL going on in a particular subject area? So what the impact on customer purchasing might be is something that we're hoping to see through expanded data. And again, looking at the usage and trying to understand how the usage and the user engagement might differ, as Whitney was showing some of the time spent in books, comparing it to the other eBook Central usage, but then it's also an opportunity for me to compare that to the usage on my own platform. That said, if usage is on another platform, what does that mean for my own platform and understanding the usage being distributed? Those are still things we're trying to understand. Again, as well as the impact on the libraries that are involved, the lending libraries. Is that increasing your turnaways if you've just lent your single concurrent user book? Is the borrowing library looking at the ILL activity in light of the turnaways that they might get on their own publisher platform solutions or ProQuest solutions? So again, what's that usage looking like, how it's coming into the institutions for discussion, and is that going to change anybody's behavior? So just showing you a little bit about what kind of data we had so far out of this pilot. We've had 57 loans, only 42 unique titles out of the 2,700 titles that are in the OUP pool. That's 1%. Again, I don't know if that's a lot or not a lot at this stage. It didn't scare me, right? One of the things Whitney and I started talking about, and I think what George alluded to is that because most of the members in the lending and borrowing cohorts actually already owned a lot of OUP content. And we'll see when we look at where some of the borrowing happened, what that might reveal to us. 23% of the loans, 23 of the loans, or 40% of the loans were actually never accessed. Well, that kind of sounded a lot, but then when I am able to talk to the librarians, in fact, finding out that that's pretty standard for ILL that just don't ever get picked up in print. So again, the usage doesn't feel like a tidal wave that's gonna lead into cannibalization. Seeing that in the number of titles that were checked out and the regularity and frequency with which those titles were checked out was also fairly manageable. Again, not a lot of context yet, but it wasn't scary. And I think what's really most interesting about some of this data is that seeing that the median pub date of the title loaned was from 2017. So in thinking about that drive to broaden discoverability of content, or to maybe fill in the gaps of owned content at some of the institutions, we're seeing that mid-list, those mid-list publications really surface in this activity. I thought because I'm speaking with librarians, I would try to do something that looks kind of statistical. So this is my attempt at a scatter chart. Just to right? I think it's used well. Just to show you kind of what the distribution of pub years, of loans by pub year look like. You know, obviously a concentration towards the more frequent, but certainly the discoverability of titles going back to 2004 benefits from access through the discovery pool of an EILL collection. And then, again, just looking at the types of institutions, again, no surprise that the doctoral universities as well as the master's colleges had a lot of usage. The public library usage was a Prospector participant, and somebody was looking at a lot of our general science books and downloading a lot of pages and a lot of chapters. That's okay, because that library probably would not have been purchasing a lot of OUP content. Perhaps that user was at a community college, or I don't know. But I'm happy for the usage to have been going through a library that perhaps did not have access to OUP content, either directly through our own platform or through their ProQuest purchases. And then just one final data set, again, just looking at subject areas. Again, not that surprising given the profile of OUP publishing, the science being a bit of an anomaly, except that's the two users at the public library who probably were downloading a lot of books. But I think what's also interesting is looking at the psychology and medicine usage, thinking about how ILL might allow libraries to fill in specialist areas where they were not already doing a lot of collection development. But again, more data to follow. So answering the question that I'm sure a lot of publishers have when thinking about EBook ILL, will I sell only one copy to the state of California? Don't think so. However, I will asterisk that by saying if any of you went to the Big Ten presentation yesterday, it made me question this a little bit. But we'll see. Sorry. Does EBook ILL cannibalize adoption purchases? The evidence isn't really showing any of that, just by being able to see the frequency with which any one particular book was borrowed at any one time, or the repeat borrowing of any one book, which you would expect to see in an adoption use case. That didn't happen. And will data from EBook ILL change collection decisions of borrowing libraries? Don't know yet, but I hope so. So thank you very much.
Okay, I think now we're going to open the floor to questions. And if you have a question, you want to raise your hand?
Please raise your hand and I will bring you the microphone.
Yeah, so my question's for George and Alan. I was just curious, can you give some details about the tokenized URL? Is that restricted to an individual, so only that individual can access the ebook?
No, it can be used by anyone. So theoretically, a patron could pass it off to somebody else. But we would see the use, however, inside the statistics we get from ProQuest. And it might suddenly look like a higher use thing if it were used in a class or something. But it's anonymous.
Okay, all right.
And just to add on to, yes, so we're aware of that edge case, and that's one of the items that we have targeted to resolve this year as well, is figuring out a way to manage that more precisely.
And I also want to say, this is MVP. This is not a full-bore rollout service. I mean, I think it's important to contextualize that. I mean, we've gotten to a place where we can actually think about a license to be somewhat shareable for an ebook. I think that's a tremendous accomplishment in and of itself. I think the question about the security, it's really more, and I was actually saying this earlier, we have to, with publishers, figure out where the level of trust is to actually do this. It isn't just a question of cannibalizing or not. It's, what are the features that are gonna increase this conversation so that we can provide more access to this content, to material that's out of our collection scope. And that's some of the things that we're seeing now. So, and I think a pilot like this allows those conversations to happen. So not a great thing in terms of a tokenized URL, but it's a start. Yeah.
Hello, I'm Melissa Amy Brown from the University of Minnesota. And my question is, did you receive any feedback from the users about this?
In a union catalog like ours, we're a couple steps away from the actual end user, so we typically don't communicate with them directly. I think it might be a little different in Alan's situation, but we do see the use data, and so that we can at least get a sense of what they're doing with it.
And ironically enough, like everything at New School, we start with the user study first as far as how exactly this is going to look, how it's going to play out. I think if I were looking back on it, the one user study I didn't do was what the librarians were going to have to go through. That probably should have had that, but I went feet first into it and wound up having some of the technical issues that we had, so.
One thing I also should mention is that we had one lead ILL librarian at Auraria Library who did a wonderful job of putting together instructions, because he was an expert on doing this through our union catalog. And so having somebody put those instructions together from a library's perspective, then we could pass it out to all of the lenders so they knew exactly what to do.
And SUNY isn't here to comment, but they also had a... do you want to go? Yeah.
Go ahead.
two people who were absolutely critical to this pilot were Shannon Pritting and Timothy Jackson from SUNY. They told a story at a conference I was at, which is absolutely amazing, which is that SUNY New Paltz actually had a mold problem. And because of EILL, they were actually able to cover some of the physical material loss to the other campuses within that solution through EILL. I mean, it was absolutely fascinating. It was something I had never thought about in terms of a use case. And it's part of the reason that the SUNY numbers are as high as they are, is because they're actually making up for lost print material. And it was something I hadn't thought of. You know, some of that could have been CDL, some of it, but if there were licensed content of that material, then circulate it. And it was just something that I thought was an absolutely fascinating use case that was so out of scope when we originally did this. But it just makes sense.
Hi, Ann Osterman with Viva. We have, we have these, I see the appeal of this. I see the data exchange is really valuable, but Viva also has contracts with both publishers on the stage that are DRM-free, Whole Ebook ILL, no restrictions whatsoever. And so I just hope this pilot doesn't erode your tendency or to also do that route as well, because we found that really valuable.
I think what's really interesting about that, and I should say that, we had just a couple of years ago, and I think Viva was probably one of the first, introduced allowances for EILL into our license agreements. That said, our platform itself and the integration of our platform with all of this workflow is not something that our platform currently can support. So from the discoverability and from the real ability to monitor and learn and understand and do things from our platform to support the ILL experience, we're not there yet, right? So that's why understanding how ProQuest could help through all of the workflow tools was an ability for us to learn and bring that back in, should that be something that we can then start to look at. But for me, and to be able to sort of help my colleagues understand that, yes, it's one thing to give you, the library, the right to do this with the content off of our platform, but just understanding what's really involved in making that happen are really two separate things.
The other outcome that was kind of something I hadn't anticipated was it was one of the first times I'd actually sat down with a publisher to talk about interlibrary lending and what the process was, and there was a level of comfort as well as some tough conversations. I think that, having these types of conversations has completely, I understand and empathize with the publisher side of things probably better than I ever have because of Lisa and because of Suzanne. And I think it's important to, those types of conversations wind up, year one is kind of checking out the tech model. Year two is checking out the business model, right? I mean, so if we're thinking about this in kind of a scalar way, I'm also thinking, what is it going to take for us to actually put this into production? And then how is that going to influence or change our collection behavior? I think that's really what we're starting to ask in year two. So that's part of the reason I'm really thankful for the extension of the program.
I should also mention that, as was earlier talked about, we limited the program to owned ebooks. So for example, in our DDA program, you have to do several short-term loans, and then we trigger a purchase. Of course, we would love it if we could also have it to the entire corpus of materials. And in some ways, that would actually bring extra revenue to the publishers, because it would bring us to that point of purchasing sooner. But I think for the sake of the pilot, we narrowed the scope so we could get a better feel for what's going on.
Thank you. And we're at time. I think there might be a few more questions, but I just want to thank our excellent panelists for this talk today.
All right. Okay. Thank you.